morning, Newsroom, and happy Wednesday to you. I hope you have had a great start to the week. Now, in yesterday's announcement, you may remember that Kid President introduced us to Martin Luther King Jr., someone you have likely heard about before. And today, I wanted to share a little bit more about Martin Luther King, but not just about him and who he was, but about the work that he did. When we talk about Martin Luther King, we often hear about the civil rights movement, civil disobedience, and peaceful protests. And so I wanted to share this short video to give a little context about what all of that means.
Dear Tim and Moby, what was the civil rights movement? From PJ. The American Civil Rights Movement was about having universal rights for all people, regardless of race. Before the 1960s, America was a very different place. In many parts of the country, African Americans were barred from lots of public spaces. Movie theaters, restaurants, buses, and trains all had separate areas for black and white customers. African Americans also had to live in separate neighborhoods and couldn't hold the same jobs as whites. This practice of separating African Americans from white people was called segregation. Segregation was widespread, touching every part of society, even at school. One turning point came in 1951 with an African American student named Linda Brown. She was barred from attending the school closer to her home. Instead, she had to ride a bus to a black school across town. So, her father joined a dozen other parents and sued the school board. By 1954, the case had gone all the way to the Supreme Court. The court ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. It was a landmark case known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Well, it wasn't that simple. These new laws had to be enforced, and there were still lots of other laws and customs that discriminated against African Americans. In 1955, an activist named Rosa Parks took a seat on a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Soon the bus filled up, leaving no free seats for white passengers. When the driver told Parks to give up her seat, she refused and was arrested. Well, that was the rule back then in Alabama and throughout most of the South. African Americans had to give up their seats if any white people were standing. Joanne Robinson, another activist, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist minister, organized a boycott of the city's bus system. Most black citizens of Montgomery refused to ride on the buses for more than a year. They chose to walk rather than submit to unfair regulations. The boycott led to a lawsuit, and in 1956, a Supreme Court decision banned segregated buses. But the fight still wasn't over. Dr. King and other brave activists organized nonviolent protests across the nation. During sit-ins, black students visited whites-only lunch counters. They quietly sat there until they were served, or until the store closed. As a result, they were often harassed, or even arrested. And freedom riders rode buses from other states throughout the South. They were there to make sure the buses were integrated, with blacks and whites sitting next to each other, like the law said. These peaceful protests were often met with anger and sometimes violence. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how something like that would make people so mad. But people often feel threatened by change. The movement reached a high point with the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. On August 28, 1963, hundreds of thousands of people marched through the heart of the country's capital. Dr. King delivered his momentous I Have a Dream speech. The very next year, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed all discrimination based on race, religion, sex, or ethnicity. Public facilities could no longer be segregated, and businesses would have to make an effort to hire a more diverse workforce. The door to racial equality had opened, but there was still a long way to go. New laws were just the beginning. It took years of struggle before they were fully enforced. Well, changing people's prejudices, that's something no law can fix. African Americans have continued to face violence and discrimination. But dedicated activists are keeping the world's attention on the issue. The legacy of the civil rights movement lives on in these new generations, and in other groups who have been inspired by its successes. Women, immigrants, gay and transgender people, these groups and others are still struggling to be treated with dignity, whether it's fighting for equal pay, the freedom to live proudly and openly, or the right to simply be left in peace. If there's one thing we've learned from the civil rights movement, it's that history is on their side. You have a dream too? Let's hear it. Oh, gee, wish I could hear the rest, but class is starting. Bye.
We will continue to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. all week long as we lead up to Monday's holiday in which we celebrate his birthday. Now to talk riddles. Yesterday's riddle, what can't talk, but will reply when spoken to? And the answer was an echo. So congratulations to Miss Fairweather, Miss Robinson, Miss Ibilola, Miss B, Mr. Z, Miss Pierce, Miss Heller, Miss Franco, Miss Etchie, and also want to give a shout out to both Miss Barba's class and Miss Franco's class. Miss Franco's class gave a couple of answers for very creative answers. Second graders said Alexa, can't talk but will reply, and similarly, Miss Franco's class said Siri. So very thoughtful and creative answers. Not what I had in mind, but nonetheless, good job to those. Now for today's riddle. I don't have eyes, ears, nose, and tongue, but I can see, smell, hear, and taste everything. What am I? Let us know, and we will share those answers on Wednesday. Thursday. That is it for today. Remember those 4 B's. Be responsible, be respectful, be safe, and be honest. Have a great day or not. The choice is yours.